What up guys, RPop here, and welcome to episode 3 of the RaftCast. For today's session, I am happily joined by some of my awesome community members and supporters, Popcorn, Benny, and Masokitty, as well as my sister Saren. Feel free to say hi everybody!
I'm free
Hi
to say
everybody!
I'm so free!
I'm free!
So, the previous episodes we've had so far have definitely focused a bunch on, technology and how it's evolved and how we've used it. We've talked about tech and, gaming and content creation, stuff like that. But today, we're going to be taking a step back because books, I feel, don't get the same love and attention they used to. And I'm not talking about those books like Shakespeare and the chemistry texts and the manuals, the stuff we're told to read for school or work or whatever. No. I'm talking about the books that people read for their own satisfaction and personal interest, mostly fiction, sometimes nonfiction. The books that people go out of their way to read simply because they want to. And everybody's got their own preferences for genres, themes, character archetypes, so on and so forth. And different books mean different things to people. People still love reading books, but especially from younger generations, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like people don't talk about books enough. I don't know if it's a general disinterest or people consuming content in other ways, or maybe I'm talking to the wrong people. But books deserve to be talked about, and I'm glad that we're doing that today. How about you guys?
I like books.
Yeah,
I love books.
I don't read them much anymore, sadly.
Yeah, I agree. I also don't read them as much as I would like to anymore, and I keep trying to make a point of that, but it's hard. Really hard.
Yeah, I'm trying with them. I'm making more of an effort this year.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I got my 50-book resolution this year, and I've already gotten 5 read, so I'm trying to stay on top of it.
Nice.
Heck yeah.
Well done.
Go off.
Maybe I need to do something like that for myself too, because believe it or not, as much as I talk about writing topics, I'm not much of an avid reader.
I'm the same.
I mean, granted, I read a lot of nonfiction stuff, but in terms of fiction, I actually don't read a lot
True.
for quite a bit of my life.
I don't know if this is true for everyone who ages, but do you feel like when you get older, the more nonfiction you read, like the more history, the more science, the more like textbooks?
The more self-help.
Maybe. I don't read self-help because it's just like George Carlin once said, it's not really self-help, it's help. It's not. If it was self-help, you would have needed a book in the first place.
Well, I started around 29-30, so you guys are well on the way.
29-30. That was a terrible year for the United States and the rest of the world because the Great Depression was worldwide.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think a few of us are each going to talk about our own book that's been meaningful to us. With a couple of us are going to be they don't really have their chosen books, but they are going to be asking questions, maybe speaking from time to time about some random titles, or just engaging in discussion, because that's a pretty solid discussion. So the book that I actually decided to choose, some people might have heard of. Saren definitely has. She and her friends back in middle school actually introduced me to this series, and I may have even mentioned it in my community from time to time. It's called Warriors, but I'll mostly be talking about the first installment, Into the Wild. Saren, was it as you suspected it might be?
Yep. I was right. I figured that's what it would be.
You were right. So yeah, like I said earlier, I'll admit throughout most of my life, I haven't really read a lot of fiction. I was obsessed with nonfiction growing up. Saren remembers this, but I did read fiction kind of from time to time. And even by middle school, I had only read a few stories here and there. I didn't know what Warriors was about, but Saren and a bunch of her friends at the time were obsessed with it, and so I read it out of curiosity. And I don't know how quick I read it, but it wouldn't surprise me if I read it within a single evening because I'm actually a very fast reader. So, real quick before I continue too, I've been a writer, and I've created my own original stories for a long time, but by middle school, I only had 3 or 4, I think. But when I finished the first book of Warriors, I was somehow hooked, because the Warriors series was definitely made for young adults. Even the first book alone, it was tackling multiple concepts from faith and fate and intolerance to coming of age and even death. I mean, there are multiple characters that we see dying or dead in the first book alone. I'm sure you can remember some of them, Saren. But there were some deeper and darker themes in that book than what I expected, but I was captivated by the fantasy and the realism and even the brutality that the series introduced me to. And as someone who was barely a teenager at the time and who was interested primarily in nonfiction and science, those themes being tackled in fiction like that left a huge impression on me. And the ideas presented in the first Warriors series in particular were a huge inspiration for what actually became my Hunter's Wolf comic. Warriors, for me, was as much of a mystery as it is a coming-of-age story, which is something that really resonated with me in a way that hadn't before. And as a result, I ended up becoming a lot more invested in those kinds of stories, and I started creating more and more and more coming-of-age related stories, or with that kind of theme in the books themselves. And especially character development. Sarah knows how much I love character development. I talk about it in a lot of my videos and with her multiple times. But within 5 years of reading that book for the first time, the number of stories, of original stories that I created grew from like 3 or 4 to over 15. And at this point, it's well over 20. And a lot of them are coming-of-age stories because I really enjoyed those, because Warriors really introduced me to that concept. So at least in my creative and writing journey, it's been a huge inspiration for me for sure. It left a really big impact on me.
Yeah, on both of us, really, because, I mean, again, for me, I never have, like, analyzed things as much as you have just in the long run, whether that's, you know, books, movies, like, anything. But it was just, like, such an important series to me, and one that I was reading so frequently at the time. And I actually, from my friend, got a lot of those books again, and I now have, like, probably upwards of 30 of the books in my room.
That's a lot of books. So what kind of, like, nabs you and pulls you in where you just start getting that kind of momentum?
Is that question more for...
It's for both of you, really, because you find one, and then you just see, all of a sudden it's like dung 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 dung. You're just stacking them up and just plowing straight through them. Because I've never been a big reader myself, but my brothers were.
I mean, at least for me personally, I love serialized stories. I love things that are drawn out, not like super drawn out, but that are drawn out over maybe anywhere between 3 and 6 entries. I mean, I often write trilogies personally myself, but the serialized content means that you can go more in depth in the world and the characters and the story, and I love that exploration, especially when it comes to characters and character development. That's one of my favorite aspects of writing in general, and seeing other creative content, is to see how characters change and develop over time, whether that's for better or worse, really.
You said the story takes place over several centuries?
Did I?
I think you might have said centuries, yes. Did you mean series?
You mean volumes?
I think I meant entries is what I meant, and maybe
That
the previous.
Cool if like one entry of the book was on one generation, and then it's a big world building. If it's 300 years, it's like, you know, the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra, you know, different generations.
Yeah.
I thought that was the first thing that popped into my head.
Yeah, which, I mean, technically speaking, yes, all of these books go through so many generations, but it's, you know, for those of you who don't know, it's cats. It's all like, you know, it is warrior cats. So it does go across multiple generations, but obviously their lives are not quite the same as ours. So technically speaking, she wasn't wrong. I know it's not what she meant,
right?
But that was still accurate.
These sentient sapient cats, they live the same amount of time that Earth cats live, like around 20 years.
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean,
except they're wild, but yes.
Yeah, they don't consider it as years, so it is a little bit harder to kind of tell sometimes. But again, there are multiple generations.
Yeah, and so there's usually one series of 6, followed by another series of 6, and so on and so forth. And usually each series tackles a different group of characters. The first series actually only followed one particular character, and then subsequent series would follow anywhere from like 3 to 6 characters or something like that. But I want to say that there's at least 6 different series right now. I'm only most familiar with the first 4.
Yeah, there are a lot. There's multiple series in this. And again, looking back, I mean, they're not like super well done books, but
the first series was.
Well,
the first series was amazing.
Yeah, the first series was, but like in the long run, looking back, it's like, okay, yeah, these are written in, a very different way than most of the books that I would read now, but it was still just something that we really enjoyed.
Well, yeah, and when you're that young too, because we were preteens, teenagers around that time, so we didn't necessarily know any better for some of those books. I've actually seen some fun videos in recent years about how some people would rewrite some of those Warriors series. Not the first one, because the first one is almost perfect, but any of the later ones, I've seen some people rewrite them, and I'm just like, oh my god, that would have been so much better if it was written that way.
Yeah.
It makes sense. I love this.
I think a lot of these kinds of books, especially if you, like you said, you're preteen or early teenager, they will inspire people to write. And, I think fan fiction is one of the first things you explore as a young person.
I totally agree. Oh, sorry, Mesa, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. I was just agreeing, definitely. I remember as a kid, one of the things that first started me into writing was there were these little picture books about this dog that was like a ship captain or whatever. So I just started writing my own little picture books about this dog.
Yeah, and kind of the same for Otter and I. So we actually kind of did our own like take on Warriors at the time with a lot of the stuffed animals we had, and we created our own clan, and just
we created our own characters.
Yeah, this huge like thought out idea.
I laughed because I did the same exact thing.
Yeah. And then that's just how it is. I totally agree. Like that, now that I think about it, like you're right, that did kind of get me into like the fan fiction. That was kind of the first step.
It was the catalyst.
Yeah, it was I think for both of, I mean, you kind of had a little bit of a story at that time, Otter, but not quite to the same degree as after then. So I think even for you, it was definitely a catalyst, and caused us both to start writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I was actually writing beforehand. I was starting to write. I don't know if you remember Tales of the Wild, but I was starting to write that at 11, back in 6th grade, before I'd ever been introduced to Warriors. So I was starting to write my own original stories, but like I said, I only had a few at the time. It turned from 3 or 4 to, it surged to like 20 in the course of about 5 years, and I think Warriors was a big result of that. And fanfiction was also a little bit of a catalyst too. Not quite as big, but it was still a small catalyst too.
Yeah. But I mean, overall, I feel like your writing wasn't very solid before Warriors, and that's kind of what changed that.
That is true. Yeah, I was just saying that I would agree. I would agree with that.
I think that's something a lot of people don't really think about, is that in order to write, you have to read.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, that was always a tough one for me. Even though, from an objective standpoint, reading is your market research when it comes to writing, because you want to see what has already been done and what's popular.
Right.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely.
And I imagine that often you do have to make yourself read some absolute shite.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure we have all been there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not going to be very popular, because some of the shite I've read is some of people's favorites.
Hey, that's why everybody's got their own preferences and perspectives. I mean, there are some things that are arguably better no matter what, but I mean, everything else, it's perspective, really.
Yeah, it's so hard to say that any book is better than another, though, for any reason. Like, it doesn't, I think perspective is kind of the only thing that matters.
It's true. You can't say Mein Kampf is better than the Bible. You just can't.
Opinions are subjective.
That is one example.
Oh, jeez. Speaking of, Benny, do you want to talk about your story?
The year was...
Is it Mein Kampf?
I was gonna say.
Anyway, hold on. And just for the record, it's not Mein Kampf. Okay. Now, the year was 1993. My grandfather is a well-renowned a theoretical physicist, nuclear scientist, and medical doctor. He dies and leaves my mother the entire, immeasurable library that he had. And my mom only got to take about a third of it. And my room, when I was growing up, from 1991 all the way to 1999, where the story takes place, my whole room was wall-to-wall books. 3 walls of books,
Wow.
And one of the first, times my mom was like, "Hey, I want to read you a story," and it was, probably like Harry Potter or something. And I'm like, "No, I'm not interested in any books." And so I go to the wall and I'm like, "Let me see what this is all about." And I pick a book almost at random, but it was small. It was a small book, and it was written in 1884, I think. But this particular copy was from like 1940, and it was a book called Flatland by Edwin Abbott. Edwin Abbott, I think is his name. And this book, I'm 8 years old in 1999, and I'm reading this book, and it's talking about this. Well, it's a book from the perspective of a square, like an actual square, 2-dimensional square, talking about the class systems of the age that he lives in this world entirely made of shapes. And I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, this is like a fun little book. And suddenly, because the book is about the class system, really, it's about basically really, like, if you're really looking at the book, it's really about a commentary on Victorian life at the time of the 1800s. But here's where my mind got opened up, is when a sphere speaks. Well, actually, it starts with the square having a dream about him being next to a line, and he gets closer, and these lines are several different lines and some points, and he's trying to convince these lines that there's another dimension than one dimension. There's a second dimension. He goes to these lines and these points, and he's saying, like, look, I'm not just a line, I'm a line of lines. And he's trying so hard to prove to them that there's more than just northward and southward, that there's another axis, and he just can't do it. And just in the end, these lines and points, just rather than try to comprehend his message, they attempt to kill him in his dream. And he wakes up and he's like, what a weird dream. And so later on in the day, he gets he hears a voice from above him, but he doesn't know what above is or below is. He just knows lengthward and widthward. And this voice is talking about a higher dimension than a second dimension. And he's just like in his dream. He can't seem to grasp it. He doesn't know where other ways to go. And the sphere says, once every few thousand years, I have to come down and try to convince the people of Flatland of a higher vision. And eventually, what happens to the square is the sphere basically takes him up to see what is up above, and basically the square's eyes is open, but the square's kind of goes too far, or rather, so to the sphere's perspective, because the square is like, you have shown me that there is more than lengthward and widthward, and now that there's upward. And there must be a more perfect being than you, an even a higher dimension. And the sphere is like, that's entirely nonsense. You can't be serious. I'm afraid that I've failed you, and I'm just going to set you back down. And the square spends the rest of his life trying to convince the residents of Flatland of a higher dimension, and he's eventually arrested. And 7 years later, he writes his novel. So 8-year-old me is like, this is a concept that's crazy. Like, there is something bigger than me, and I'm like, Mom, there might be even something bigger than the God you believe in. Like there might be something higher than him, and I'm not necessarily chastised for it. I have a very open-minded family, but it's very much like, oh, you're. I don't think you got the point of that book. The point is more of about the classes and the because in the book the triangles are the lowest class, and the more sides you have, the higher the class you are. Circles are the best class. They're the priests. It's not even about the characters or the plot. It's about the concept. And when I was 8, that's all it was to me. Is this amazing concept that there could be an infinite amount of dimensions, like spatial dimensions. Anyway, that's my story.
So first off, I will say, Otter Dad would greatly appreciate you.
Your father? or your or your husband,
my partner.
boyfriend.
Here's the husband thing again.
Pops up yet again. But anyways, no, I am talking about.
That's fine. Sorry.
I am talking about my partner. No, but because he enjoys stuff like that. Because as much as he loves to play various Mario and Legend of Zelda games, he also enjoys a lot of theoretical concept. You should see some of the books that he reads as often as possible, relating to biology, evolution, crazy concepts that most people don't even think about. He loves that kind of stuff. And I've never read Flatland myself, but I have heard of it, and I do know little bits and pieces about the concepts that are kind of mentioned in there. And it is kind of funny that even way back in the late 1800s, that an author was talking about this, and in a way, a lot of the concepts in there, from what you were talking about, and, like the social castes and whatnot, that still has relevance today, even 125 plus years later. And that's kind of bonkers to me.
Oh yeah, no, it's brilliant. I think it's a great book, and even though it's a kid's book, it's a great read. It's very short, so if you got an afternoon, give it a chance.
Well, that's probably one of those kinds of books with messages and concepts that it's just one of those books that I feel like could transcend time, because I feel like it already has. Because what did you say?
1884 is my
Okay.
recollection. I could remember it being 100 years before 1984, which is another book in science fiction.
So that's basically about 140 years ago.
Yeah.
That's wild.
There's also commentary on women and their roles in Victorian society. So, because in the book, women are lines. They're not square. They're not shapes. They're lines, and so they have to constantly emit like a peace cry, which is they make a noise to make sure that people know they're coming, because otherwise they can't see them. They can only see them lengthwise, not widthwise.
Mm-hmm.
So women are not allowed to work. They just stay at home because they're dangerous. Women working away.
That's
Can't have
an
that.
interesting concept, a way to explore that concept.
Well, especially for that time period,
Yeah.
It does sound like a book ahead of its time.
Who knows?
Yeah,
Who knows?
just a bit.
Maybe he's a sphere from the future. Maybe he's from the fourth dimension. And he's trying to really get us. I don't know. What's funny about it is the book itself. It's not. It doesn't say written by Edwin Abbott. It says written by A Square. As the author.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Square.
That's fun.
Written by A Square.
Yeah.
I've personally found interest in the idea of, multiple or infinite dimensions or universes. Like, I've played with that concept with my own stories before. I find it interesting that could be a concept that even exists at all. I don't know why. Like, I love the idea of, all these spatial anomalies and stuff like that scientifically could and couldn't make sense all at the same time. And not time anomalies, though. I don't fuck with time anomalies.
Yeah. I mean, this is like almost a century before Edward Witten in 1956 talking about string theory and stuff, and multiple dimensions as we know it now.
Yeah, that's crazy for sure.
I think it's Maso who has the third book, which is I'm interested in. Probably more characters in my book.
We've already got talked about about two interesting ones. So
Yeah.
let's see what we got for
many
number 3.
interesting ones, honestly.
All right.
Yeah, that's true.
So, in keeping with my fashion, my book is depressing.
Ooh, boy.
It's the first book I read as a child that introduced me to the concept of death for no reason. So
Okay.
it is called Bridge to Terabithia. There is a
Oh
movie,
my god.
but I have not watched the movie.
Never seen the movie either.
Oh, I've seen. Sarah and I have both seen the movie. We used to have it as kids.
Yeah, truthfully, we never read the book, so I don't know how true to the book it is, but it's a very good movie.
Well, neither of us have watched the
Yes.
movie, so we don't know how true to the movie it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so it's about a boy who I think he's 11, 10 or 11, named Jess, and this new girl moves in next to him named Leslie. So they start getting close. They basically bond over trying to be the fastest kid in the 5th grade. So they're always running and doing everything. And they find this place in the woods where they decide that they're going to be the king and queen of it. They're going to call it Terabithia. But the way to get to Terabithia is there's a rope hanging from a tree. You have to take the rope, swing across, and land on the other side. And once you get there, that's Terabithia. So to kind of make the long story short, because I don't want to tell you the whole book here, they get really close. They're developing things in Terabithia. They have a little dog named Prince Terrian, which is the jester and guardian of Terabithia. So in something that I didn't really think about when I was young, but now I do, highly, just like, wow. One day, Jess's teacher tells him that she's going to go into the city to see the Smithsonian, and would he like to go with her? So,
and to interject real quick, because he and the teacher had been kind of forming like a close like friendship bond by that point, hadn't they?
They had, yeah.
Yeah. Just to make sure it didn't sound weird to people who didn't know.
Well, yeah, and it didn't seem weird to me the first time I read it, but rereading it, I'm like, that's a little weird that this teacher would just call him up at home and be like, me and you alone are going to go to the Smithsonian today. So I was like,
what was
all
the book written?
It was
That's actually a good question, because that definitely would not have been as for the time period, that might not have been as weird.
Yeah, in the 70s that wasn't weird.
I remember watching
Willy
Wonka
not so
at the
much.
Chocolate Factory, and the guy at the beginning, the bartender, he's like touching the kids, and it's like normal. Everyone,
I know, it's so creepy, but
Times have
so that
changed.
aside, when he's on that trip with the teacher, Leslie, she's going to go to Terabithia by herself. There's this huge rainstorm. The creek that they have to go over is like swollen with water. It's flooding on the side. But she's going to Terabithia, even if Jess isn't there to go with her. She goes to swing across, and she ends up tangled in the rope and stuck in floodwaters, and she dies. So the rest of the book is just dealing with this fact and having nobody around him really know what to do to make it better. But that was my first real experience with she died for no reason. Like, there's no, heroic thing that she did, and there's no magic that's going to bring her back because she's a good person.
It just happened.
Dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good introduction though. Like, it's a child character, so you can really relate. It's
And
A good and terrible introduction all at once.
Exactly.
Right.
I think it's good for development. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we should shield our children forever from that kind of thing. But I think it's actually good to be exposed to death and to explain the concepts in a way that a child can understand.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
I think it's important to make sure that we introduce kids to some of the darker concepts in a way that they can understand, because, again, the world is full of goods and evils, and kids do need to understand that there is both out there.
Oh, yeah.
And that, they can still be open-minded and optimistic, but they also need to know when to be cautious. And funny enough, kids in general do tend to have much better instincts than adults.
Oh,
It's kind of hard to say why.
Well, because they rely more on instincts. Adults rely more on both wisdom and knowledge of their experience.
Yeah.
True. But, I mean, I think it's... Because has anybody, I know Saren has anybody seen Puss in Boots: The Last Wish?
I love that movie.
Nope.
Yeah.
So good.
Well, it is actually for a sequel, it is significantly better than its predecessor.
Never saw the original.
Significantly.
I was told.
Yeah, and you don't need to.
No, you really don't need to.
Yeah.
But in The Last Wish, there's this introduction of this character named Death. He is literally death. I mean, and Puss he's already sacrificed 8 of his lives just unceremoniously. It's like he doesn't even care about it. But now he's on his last life, and Death might actually come to claim him. But the way that he's portrayed, and the way that, in a way, Death is developed, and Puss's anxiety about death is explored, it's crazy how well executed it is for a children's movie. And it's fantastic that concept was introduced as well.
Probably the best animated anxiety attack I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Honestly.
Oh yeah, definitely. But being able to execute dark themes like that, and I would even argue the same thing for Avatar: The Last Airbender. It explores so many dark themes. Okay, all of you had to have seen at least a little bit of Avatar.
I've seen it all.
It is one of the.
Yeah.
It
I've
is
seen it
one
all.
of the.
Freaking 3. They
Oh
go to the temple. Everyone's freaking dead. Like
Yes.
Oh yeah.
like they say in the title, obviously Last Airbender, but like they really hammer that in the third episode going forward.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd argue that that's probably one of the greatest animated series of all time because of how well it executed its story, its characters, and how it intermingled everything, and how it managed to introduce kids to so many dark themes. Because Saren and I, we grew up with Avatar: The Last Airbender. Like, we were growing up as it was coming out. I think we started watching it around the time that the middle of the first season had already come out.
I'm so annoyed that I was... it was definitely... I mean, obviously, I'm older than you by only, like, a few years. But, like, I was at the age where, like, I'm too old for Nickelodeon. And so I didn't get to see it till college.
Yeah.
So frustrating.
But I mean, a
I was
show
watching
that...
Toonami when I was 28. What's wrong with you?
I'm at that age where I'm like, I have to be cool. I have to be like, no, I'm an adult. Even though I'm just not at that age where I'm like, I can just do whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah.
I don't get that.
But how it was able to introduce so many dark themes, from genocide and imperialism to, I mean, death in a variety of forms, revenge and abuse and cruelty, but also friendship and trust and on it. Like, it introduced so many concepts that were so easy for me to grasp as, what, an 11-year-old kid, maybe? Something like that?
Something like that.
It's all
Yeah,
the way it's presented to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a lot of different content, from books, TV shows, movies, it's a big part of it is presentation and how it's executed.
Definitely.
And there are a lot of stories that do that very well. And like Bridge to Terabithia, Avatar: The Last Airbender, even in a sense Warriors 2, and like stories like those are definitely well executed in what they're trying to portray. And I feel like we need more stories like that, whatever medium they are.
I think it's hard to figure out new ways to tell it that isn't just like a regurgitation of a story that's already been told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but there's nothing wrong with the oral tradition. That's what humans have done before writing, and so there's no...
You talking kind of like plays and stuff?
I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with taking other people's work and putting a bit of your own in it. It's the concept of, equivalent to exchange plus one. You got yours with someone else's, and then I'm not talking... Okay, never mind. I don't know.
No, you're kind of talking about taking an existing story and basically putting your own spin on it while still presenting the same kinds of concepts.
Not at all. I'm just saying human beings, right? All they can do is... I'm speaking to you in English. This is not a language that I've invented. This is a language that has been invented before me, and I'm explaining in sentences and concepts that have been said before. Like there's really nothing in my brain my brain is working with these tools, and these aren't my tools. These are the tools that came before me, and I'm reading books that came before me, and if I'm writing a story, then there's going to be some influence from everything I've ever read. So I'm not saying there's nothing that's not your own. I'm just saying it's everything plus yours. You're just part of the next generation of stories.
Well,
no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, everything is derivative.
In a good way, I think.
Yeah, but just like what you said there about, you're speaking English and things like that, but the English language, it's constantly evolving. All languages are constantly evolving and changing, and new words are coming into use, and old words are falling out of use. And you go back 200 years, and it was going to be very, very different to what it is now. You go back another 500 years, and it's almost unintelligible compared to what it is now. But technically, it's still English. So, if you project it into the future, who knows what it's going to be like in 100 years' time, in 150 years' time. And, we have all this new technology and these new ways of doing things. All of that influences new stories and new ways of telling stories, because they didn't have iPads back like in the 1900s or the 1800s.
And that's why I think we learn things like Shakespeare in like middle school and high school, is because people didn't talk like the way we speak in that time period. we need sort of a way to put it into context so that we can maybe have a better chance of translating that stuff and learning from it. Because
Well, I think part. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, feel free.
No, I was gonna say part of it too is that like I never really realized it before, but schools in particular, they choose their curriculum for a reason, usually more or less, and they want to show you how stories and how language and how telling stories with that language has evolved over time. That's why we read stuff as old as Shakespeare and newer stuff like Great Gatsby. Like it's to show you how things have changed over time and see how what stories are told and in what way.
And that's the good thing, because the way you tell stories is constantly being reinvented as well. And
Is it?
Well, yeah, because you think about it. If you're like now and you wanted to write a story and set it in 1850, how different is your story going to be from a story that was actually written in 1850?
I mean, I think it won't be that different. I think that maybe the language has changed, but I think human experience might not have differed that much.
So the reason I think that would be different is if you take somebody writing from that time period when what they have, that's the extent. That's what they know. If you take somebody from now and go back and write something in the 1800s, we have to then think consistently. What do they not have? I can't use a cell phone. I can't use a TV. I can't use, there's so many
This
things
word didn't exist at this time.
Yeah.
What is the cell phone but like a scroll and a map and a few other it's just a tool. I think in writing that the human experience hasn't changed that much. And it's like can you tell me that Lion King isn't like Hamlet? Like just because it's lions or animated? I don't know.
I get what you're saying, but it differs from author to author. I mean, like, one of the books that I'm trying to read, and honestly, I've been trying to read it for a long time now, is 10 of the Screw.
Okay.
It's not a long book, and it was done in 1898, and I can't stand the way it's written.
I feel that way about Moby Dick.
But when I read it, I think to myself, there are books written older than this that are easier to read. I felt it's like I found myself reading a paragraph like 5 times, and I'm thinking to myself, there could have been 3 commas in this thing. I am having to resist the urge to like edit it in real time with my pen and put all alterations into the book. And don't get me wrong, I like the concept behind it, the story. It's quite gripping, but the way it is written, it feels like it's like a century older than what it is because of the structure of the book. And there are books from that contemporary period in time that are a lot easier to read. So I do think that it does vary. There is variance, and books written from that time, they don't have the benefit of what we have in the sense that we have an extra 150 years or so on these books.
I don't know. I feel that sort of builds into the the supremacy thought that we always think. We're so much more advanced than them, or we're so much more better in some ways than them. But you could tell that the person. You could tell what they're thinking. You could tell what their motives are, as long as it's well written. Like I think you could tell how, say, Theseus was thinking in the oral stories of the Greeks, or Perseus, or various heroes, say, I don't know, Gilgamesh. You can understand human beings in. But that's okay. It's okay to disagree. I just think that that a lot hasn't changed as it just because technology and maybe perception of other human races. We don't write as much as, like, I'm sure in books that were written in the 1700s are written like, well, yeah, obviously black people are not people. They're just property. It's but you could still tell a human being is writing this, and it's yeah, I'm not going to concede, but I am going to admit that it's difficult to defend my point.
And actually, well, and one way, sorry to interrupt you, Mass, but one way that I think of it too is that, books that were written in older time periods, they have the context, they have the experience, and they're telling essentially what they know about the world that exists around them. But when we're talking about, say, us trying to write something about a story and a character who existed 500 years ago, we have information and the context, but we don't have that experience. We don't have first-hand accounts necessarily of what life was really like. There's still a lot that we don't actually know, so we're trying to fill in the gaps. And, while an author from way back in that time period, it all comes naturally to them because they know what they know, but we technically don't know what we don't know. So we're trying to fill in the gaps in our own way. We're constantly thinking about, oh, right, I have to include this, but I can't include this, and oh, this didn't actually happen yet. I have to remember. Like, we have to be constantly thinking about it. So, and again, especially since our language is also very different. So there are definitely going to be differences in just very complex ways, I think.
Yeah, I think on the baseline, it's all the same. We're all people. We're just basically putting our thoughts down of what we understand and know. I mean, I can totally relate to Hercules talking to Atlas at the bottom of the world, even though I know as a 21st century human being that the world is not carried by a person on top of another mountain. But
Do you know?
Do I know?
Really?
Do I know? Do I know? One of the funniest things
they fake those pictures of Earth in space, right?
Right. I think that it was Stanley Kubrick who once said, I think faking this moon landing is too tough. Let's just shoot it on sight.
Yeah, we've got Atlas's back right here. Let's shoot it right here.
Atlas is super hot.
Rip.
But he has a tiny. Anyway, just like all the Greeks.
But an interesting thing you actually made me think of, talking about the time period, writing from the past, but actually recently I read a short story by Stephen King that was set in 2020, but he had written it back in like 2017, 2018. So there was no mention of COVID. So he writes this whole book.
What an idiot.
Place. Well, no, he didn't know. It didn't happen. But the whole thing of it was like the main character was a germaphobe. And he's like, I wrote this whole story about this germaphobe during the time of COVID. And I didn't mention COVID because it didn't exist yet.
Yeah, know, right?
It is definitely
Can you
interesting.
believe in 1984 they don't mention Reagan once? I hate it.
That does actually remind me of Stephen King's Dark Tower series, which is like one of my favorite book series. And the fact that he wrote it over a period of something close to 20 years. Although I think the first book was probably published in the late 70s. And this is one of the good things about having a book series that stretches out for an engaged length of time, in that you can evolve the story to incorporate events that happen and have happened. Because obviously, writing in the 1970s, he couldn't really aim or project what might happen in the future. But then after he was like hit by the car and like severely injured, then he still had like 3 or 4 books still left to write. So he had only done like maybe 1 book every 4, 5, 6 years up until that point, and then he knocked the last 3 books out in the space of like almost as many years. But these were in like probably around the 2001 to 2007 era where he produced these. So obviously they incorporated a lot more modern like aesthetics. And there was like alternate dimensions within this book. There was time travel, time hoppings, and alternate realities within the storyline. But they were able to evolve and grow to incorporate like modern events that happened in this time period. And yes, it did have Reagan in it as well, Benny. So, but that was not going to be a thing when he wrote the first book in the 70s, but it was a thing when he wrote like book 6 in 2004. So, and I would recommend it in a sense. If you just want like something to read and lose yourself in, I don't think there's anything beyond him wanting it to be his version of Lord of the Rings. And it's a very good melding of science fiction, fantasy, and horror.
Mm-hmm.
The underlying themes, I'm not qualified to judge. So I won't even try and go into
Is
them.
any of us qualified to judge the underlying themes of anything? I don't know. But we do anyway because we're human.
This is true.
That's very good. Good point. Good point. Well taken.
How many books are in that series?
7.
7, okay.
And the first one is actually rather short.
That's a
it's
Stephen King I've never delved into. I guess maybe I should try it.
the last 3 or 4 books are like door stoppers, typical Stephen King.
Yeah.
But they're very, very good. I mean, I got into these books actually when I was in the hospital. I needed to have my shoulder pinned, so that was the last time I actually got into a book series and read it all the way through and was absolutely like bang, 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 straight through the whole lot of them. So that was probably around 2005, so it's a while ago. But I do occasionally go back and read 1 or 2 of the books.
First time I ever heard of Stephen King was actually from a Goosebumps book, believe it or not. Like the second Goosebumps book.
I love Goosebumps.
Really? I didn't know if it was in your generation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, I remember reading some Goosebumps growing up. Not many, but definitely a few.
Another good thing about the Stephen King books is that they do actually incorporate the Stephen King universe. So he does pull in all elements from all the other books that he had written.
That's a lot of books.
Ooh, I like
Yeah.
that. I know his son, Joe Hill, does the same thing in his Nosferatu book.
So there's elements in it from Salem's Lot. There's aspects of it in it. And some of his short stories get incorporated into this world as well. So it's his magnus opus, basically.
His Silmarillion,
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's his Lord of the Rings. He's on the record as saying that. And the thing that I always like most about Stephen King is, whilst a lot of his work might be quote unquote formulaic, he's a damn good storyteller.
Yeah, he's good at it.
I don't care how formulaic
definitely.
it is when he writes good characters, but I want to see what happens to them.
Everything he does is such about the characters, and Stephen King is not afraid to kill a character.
No,
I mean, no, good. Yeah. Even real television, like really, really good television and movies are formulaic, to be fair. That's not a bad thing.
no.
That's just a word that that critics use to sound important.
Yeah, I mean, some people will say, "Oh, he's a hack. He's written like the same book 5 times or something like that." It's all very, very generic. But I read for the characters. I read for how he builds them up, and I'm curious as to whether he's going to knock them down.
Reading is entertainment, believe it or not. So if you don't like it, don't read it.
Yeah, the characters make or break it for me. If I don't like what happens, or I don't care what happens to the characters, I don't care about the story either.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
I was a world building boy. I was, but now I'm a character boy. I like
well,
characters.
this might be a controversial point of view, but I picked up the Dark Materials trilogy on the recommendation of a friend, and I started.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
so good.
So good. That's one of my favorites.
Mine too.
Well, I've got to be controversial here. I got about 2/3 of the way through the first book when I suddenly realized I don't care whether any of these characters live or die, and I just put it down and never went back to it.
I was gonna be like,
Picked
skip to the
up
end. Oh, they died. Okay.
I gave the entire set to my brother, and I just said I couldn't get into it. I really, really tried. There's some really, really great ideas in there, and there's some really, really great themes, but I just don't think this guy is telling them right. And
I feel that way about Victor Hugo.
my mom, I don't know. I mean, I said I only got like 2/3 of the way through the first book.
Yeah.
My brother came back to me and he just said, "I can see what you mean." So I don't know whether it's just aimed at a specific kind of person or whether you just have a certain kind of like mindset when you go into it. But I found that he was like the mirror image of Stephen King, where Stephen King might take a generic idea and make it all about the characters and make it like, I can't put this down. Philip Pullman had written something that had some fantastic concepts and ideas, but I just felt it was just dry, too dry, and the characterizations were nothing. So, or maybe it's because I read the Stephen King ones first. I don't know, but that was it for me. I gave it a shot, but I just could not get into it. Or I can recommend.
I would say if you're interested, give it to the second book. The second book, a very major character appears that I think to kind of help you relate to the story a little bit more. The first book is a lot of world building, a lot of introducing characters and concepts and why the church is bad and all of this. And
Oh, sorry. I'm gonna say something after you.
Go ahead.
So I'm gonna be honest. I struggle with that concept when people say that, like, oh, give it until this book. That's the problem, is that everyone's like, oh, if you don't like that first book, then that's just ridiculous. But give it until the second book, and then it's better. But at the same point, it's not, to me, things aren't worth reading if it feels like a chore to get through it.
Yeah.
You're right. And I guess I kind of contradicted myself because I hate when people tell me that about video games. Oh, 15 hours in, it gets great. I'm like, I'm not giving it 15 hours.
Yeah, but like it's so hard because everyone's like, what? You didn't like that book? And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's not my kind of book to read. Like, everyone has different preferences.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, unfortunately, again, there's all of these people that will just say, oh, well, this is one of the best books ever. But it's like, I don't read that style. Like, I don't read Stephen King. I don't really, I'm not big on that kind of writing, and I'm not big on those, like, those genres and everything. So it's hard for me to say, well, yeah, these books are good when I don't enjoy going through those books.
Yeah, I'm not a horror reader, so I've tended to avoid Stephen King, but this was not like horror. It had horror elements and it drew me in quite subtly. So I definitely recommend the first book to anybody, and if you don't like it, then yeah, just put it down. The first book is relatively short as well, so it's a good grounding. And where it goes from there is just absolutely crazy. But just on that, give it time and you might get into it or try the next volume. You got that in all aspects of life. I mean, people were telling me, just stick with season 1 of The Mandalorian. It does get better. Sometimes it works, but I think it's kind of different with books to a certain degree, because you are having to really make your brain work if you're reading a book that you don't enjoy or like. Because you've got to try and do the imagination, and I think you're doing some of the work that the book should be doing.
Yeah.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah, because for me, again, like, I've been recommended all of these books, but I'm like, okay, like, I might try to read this, but it's really not my style. And it's like, oh, but you really should. And I'm like, but people like what they like. I like,
Dragon's
fantasy, and I like fantasy and, like, some level of, like, science fiction and a little bit of, like, mystery here and there. And that may not change. So, it's just like, in terms of the reading, like, it's all like, also it kind of comes down to, like, the people who you're, like, getting recommendations from. Like, people just need to be more cognizant of the fact that not everyone likes the same things.
Yeah, definitely.
And that everybody consumes entertainment differently. Like, some people just don't like to read books at all. Some people don't like animations. Like, everybody consumes it differently.
Absolutely. And I think that needs to be, I mean, it'd be so easy to say, like, oh, that's what needs to change in this world. But I mean, we know that it's never really going to. But if people could be just a little more cognizant of each other in that way,
people need to chill the F out.
So nice. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
they need to not feel like completely invalidated when someone that they care about doesn't like something as intensely and passionately as they do.
Oh, I struggle with that.
We all struggle with it. So we all struggle with it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, because we're also defending ourselves when we do that. You know,
Yeah.
like your opinion is inherently wrong, because if it was right, then my opinion would be inherently wrong.
So she's like, no, what? Just fuck you. It's a good talk. Fuck you. You can't appreciate high culture.
Yeah, you're clearly
I
a
know,
plebeian.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's okay to criticize another piece of work as long as you're doing it in a respectful and civil way. Like, because again, everybody's got their own perspectives and preferences.
That's why it's called a civil war.
Okay. Oh, jeez.
And on that note,
Yeah. Are we at
I
the
had
final
a-
minutes?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun talking about books with people, getting to hear about other people's perspectives too. Like that
Yeah.
was very fun for sure.
next time we talk about writing.
And race.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Okay, calm
Hold your horses.
down, Mein Kampf. Calm down.
Yeah, mein Führer.
I will never call you that.
I will.
Whoa!
Oh man.
No.
Oh well, that was a very enjoyable discussion with everybody. What do you guys think?
Enjoyable.
Yeah, I really liked all that.
Thanks for not
Yeah.
shutting down my book because it didn't have characters in it.
Mein Kampf?
Yeah. Like, the best character, of course, was the writer. No, anyway, yeah.
Well, and it was nice to bring Sarah and Mass along for the ride
Yeah,
too,
I was super happy to be
Oh,
here.
yeah.
because it's
Super
mostly been
lovely.
Popcorn Benny and I for the most part.
I know,
Yeah,
which is
fun.
terrible because we're terrible people. But Mass and Saren?
Speak for yourself.
Yes,
We're
I
all
am,
terrible
I am.
people.
I am.
I'm pretty terrible, so.
I have my moments too, so
We're all terrible in our own little ways.
Alright.
Let's accept it and
Our
move
own
on.
little adorable ways.
Three cheers for being terrible! Hip hip! Oh. Hip hip! Oh.
Oh.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I plan to make the RaftCast episodes a little bit more frequent. Now, as for what topics to discuss in the next one, we'll figure that out. But
Yeah.
I am happy you guys all joined me for this discussion. This was fun. I actually felt I could contribute a lot more to it. I was really happy with it.
And I felt I
happy
contributed
to
more
be
than what I
invited.
expected.
I drank a lot more wine than I
Yeah.
thought.
We're just happy to be included.
Wine.
Out of the skull. Yeah.
I'm just happy to be here, guys.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, guys, but I'm gonna go ahead and end this RaftCast episode here. So, until the next video or podcast or whatever the frick it is, you guys, check you laters!
Bye.
Bye.